Hello, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 13 of the Midwest Gaming Classic Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Garris, Panel Director of the Midwest Gaming Classic. Retronauts regulars Bob Mackey and Jeremy Parish break down the history of Namco's grisly Splatterhouse series with the help of no less than two Splatterhouse world record competitors, Caitlin Oliver and Kevin Bunch, in this splatter-riffic panel. And you know what? Enough of me talking. Why don't we get to the podcast?
Jeremy Parish and Bob Mackey joined us at the Midwest Gaming Classic this last year from Retronauts to discuss the classic game Splatterhouse. They were joined by the TurboGrafx-16 world record holder for the game, Kevin Bunch, and the arcade record holder for the game, Caitlin Oliver. Check it out in this great presentation.
Now we've got something called Retronauts Live, who've been a perennial thing here, and this year they've said it's the splatter-riffic Splatterhouse. So I am legally required to tell the first 4 rows you're in the splash zone. So without further ado, the Retronauts.
Hello everybody. Is your mic on, Jeremy?
It says, oh no, there we go.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. He was kidding about the splash zone. We're more Galaga than Gallagher.
Oh, hey, did you just think of that?
I did.
That was great.
That guy's shirt right there says Galaga.
I like it. I like it.
I can borrow a pun. Hi Ken, nice shirt. Are we ready to go?
Yeah, should we introduce ourselves to everybody in case there's any newcomers?
Well, we'll do the podcast thing.
Yeah.
We'll do it up like an episode.
Okay.
So, this week in Retronauts, Splatterhouse. The music is in your head and your hearts. Just imagine it right now. Hi everyone, welcome to the second ever Retronauts panel at Midwest Gaming Classic. We are Retronauts, a video game podcast about, yes, classic games. And this week, or this year, I guess, we're talking about Splatterhouse because we have some experts here. So we'll just do a quick intro for ourselves. I'm Jeremy Parish, one of the co-hosts of the show.
I am Bob Mackey. I'm here to make the Splatterhouse a splatter home.
I'm Kevin Bunch. I think I'm talking too close to the mic.
He's the TurboGrafx-16 high score world record holder for Splatterhouse. I'm Caitlin Oliver. I broke the world record for the arcade version of Splatterhouse about 7 or 8 times.
So Bob and I are basically idiots when it comes to Splatterhouse, but we thought since we're here in the presence of 2 world-class players of the game, we should pick their brains and let them tell us, tell you all about the series.
They're so important they have to travel here separately. They're not allowed to be in the same car or plane together.
That's right. We can't lose both at the same time. So let's just go ahead and kick in with this discussion and talk about the original Splatterhouse, which is an arcade game developed by Namco, debuted in 1988. And actually, why don't I let you guys talk about it instead of me droning?
He's gonna pass that one on me. Yeah, it was developed in '88. It did actually have a US port, but it wasn't widely distributed, so it's pretty rare. At this point, it can kind of be an expensive PCB unless you get a good deal. There were minor changes made to the US port, mostly regarding removing religious imagery, but that didn't happen until it got ported to console. It's a brawler, a side-scrolling beat-em-up. There's 7 levels, and the scoring game mostly revolves around level 6 and on, because the rest of the game is a giant pattern. If you're willing to learn it, it's not really that bad. You can beat the game in about 20 minutes, but a score run takes about 45 minutes to an hour straight.
We should probably point out it's a very gory game. It's a horror-themed game, so the whole premise is your character Rick and his girlfriend Jennifer went into a creepy mansion.
The West Mansion,
The West Mansion.
of which there is also a resource website run by Rob Strangman. Yeah.
He, but yeah, so they like let the lights go out. She has a scream. He wakes up with a creepy mask on his face and just goes forth and beats
It's
up.
called the Terror Mask.
And beats up gross little monsters.
I mean, I think we're bearing the lead in that this is sort of the Friday the 13th unlicensed game, spun out of the 80s exploitation horror. And you have some examples there, Jeremy, right?
No, not really. But
Okay.
I
I thought you literally have a bunch.
I have a lot of notes, but nothing really about Friday the 13th, because I'm not really that familiar with the movies.
Well, I mean, he is based on the design of Jason in his... I mean, he looks like he's wearing scrubs in this game.
Right,
But it's
yeah.
more of a blue jumpsuit.
Dr. Jason Voorhees.
Yeah.
Dr. Voorhees, to the manor, please.
But
It's a little bit Reanimator, as in the Stuart Gordon adaptation of the H.P. Lovecraft story, Herbert West Reanimator.
Yeah, so the context of the game itself is it actually feels a little bit like a game out of time, because it is, a very sort of linear belt scroller, as opposed to the 3/4 perspective Double Dragon Final Fight style game that most people think of when they think of beat 'em ups. And Double Dragon had launched just the year before, so it hadn't quite become widely cloned yet. So you kind of had this change happening in the beat 'em up genre, and Splatterhouse feels a little bit like, sort of the old guard, the last of the old guard. And Namco had actually produced a few games in that style up until this point. There was Wonder Momo, which I don't think came to the US, but it was an arcade game in Japan. And then there was the Genji and Heike clans. And both of those were also that sort of 2D belt scroller, very memorization based, beat 'em up kind of brawler, but they all had different themes. Genji and Heike clans was sort of like Japanese medieval horror with lots of yokai and spirits. And Wonder Momo was more like a Power Rangers, Sailor Moon stage play, Sentai, yeah. And so, you kind of had all these different themes happening. Splatterhouse then was sort of the Hollywood, gory, Evil Dead, Friday the 13th kind of game.
I don't mean to slander the game by saying this, but it feels kind of like Altered Beast, with how you're on one plane, things explode in one hit, and there's a lot of violence for the most part.
But in this one, you get a cleaver.
It's not unlike Altered Beast, that's true.
The shotgun.
Good, I didn't
And a
anger anyone.
shotgun. Altered Beast, if that had a shotgun,
It'd be much better.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But,
respect that.
yeah. And it's not a long game, like Caitlin said. You can plow through it if you know what you're doing. There is a fair amount of memorization to it. It's not as bad as some memorization-heavy games, like R-Type or something, but...
It's not a shmup level of memorization. It's the enemies legitimately spawn in the same place every time, short of maybe 2 or 3 places.
Yeah, and if you know they're coming, you can prepare for them. The bosses, they all tend to have sort of the same patterns that you can exploit.
Yeah, so it's worth mentioning that this game was really sort of pushing the envelope in terms of what was acceptable in terms of gore and violence in the arcade. I mean, it was probably the most gruesome game to come out in arcades since Chiller, which was a game specifically designed to be disgusting and gross, and you're like using a light gun to dismember people. This wasn't quite like that, but it sort of took the sort of prevailing body horror theme that was showing up in a lot of games around that time and sort of pushed the envelope a little further and made it even more gruesome, very bloody, like there's guts splattering everywhere. I mean, there's a reason it's called Splatterhouse. It's a very, very literal sort of name. But if you look at something like Contra or Abadox, you had a lot of these games where it was about like walking inside of giant monsters and beating up their corpuscles and punching their organs and that sort of thing. And this was very much along those lines, but sort of presented in a slasher movie kind of style.
Yeah, encountering this game as a kid, I was afraid of the box. It's sort of just like walking by the horror aisle in the movie theater, in the video store. Just like, I'm sure if I watched any of these movies, I would literally die of fright. So I assumed I would die if I played Splatterhouse.
I rented this game as a kid because I loved the box so much, and my dad let me pick it. My dad got me a TurboGrafx when I was young, and that's my toe. But no, he got me a TurboGrafx when I was young, and I remember renting it from the local video store. I never got it until I was older, but I was obsessed with the game. And I figure if a kid like me could get pretty far, I couldn't regularly beat it, but if I could get that far, if you're willing and you're ready to learn how to play the game and memorize it, you too can pretty easily beat that game.
And when you're speaking of the body horror, what springs to mind is a few of the different bosses. Like you've got Biggie Man, who is this giant with a burlap sack over his head and chainsaws for hands. You've got Jennifer as a boss. I don't know if that's a spoiler at this point, but she mutates into this hideous monster with claws. And stage 6 is basically a giant womb of the house, and you're fighting little monster fetuses.
I do think it's a bit cute with how they did the most low-effort change to protect themselves from lawsuits for the home version. They basically just made Rick's mask purple. And that's kind of like making a movie called Nightmare on Oak Street with Eddie Kruger. The stripes on the sweater go a different way, so you can't sue us.
So, one of the reasons I wanted the two of you to come in and talk about this is because I'm honestly curious, like, why did you two pick this game to be sort of your expert level project? Like, what inspired Splatterhouse specifically?
With me, I always loved horror movies. I've been obsessed, unsurprisingly, since I was a little kid. My mom claims that when I was 3, my favorite movie was Night of the Living Dead, and I'd cry if they turned off the channel. I don't remember that, but I don't see why she'd make it up. But ever since then, I loved the horror genre, which is why I picked up the game as a kid. I obsessively played it as a kid, and when I went to Galloping Ghost in 2012 or so, that was the first time I had seen the arcade machine in my life, so I decided I was going to keep playing it. Somebody asked me if I was going to go for a world record. I said no, I hadn't been planning on it, but then I decided why not. And I did it. It only took like 3 weeks, because what I did was I started to memorize the patterns I was missing from the other world record holder, Anthony Paparo, who I went back and forth with several times. Great guy. And I watched his video to get some techniques, and then we've built upon each other's techniques since then to push the score from around 375-ish thousand to right now it's just at past 700,000. So in the last 3 years, we about doubled the old record.
In the past few weeks, you said?
Well, no, past 3 years.
Oh, years.
Going back
okay.
and forth.
That makes more sense.
Yeah, something like that. Shoot, I was gonna say something about the game. Oh, the biggest problem I see with people who pick up this game is they try to play it like other brawlers and proactively attack enemies. It's something you don't do.
Yeah, so you mentioned that a straight playthrough of the game takes about 20 minutes, but a high score approach takes 45, 50. So can you talk about what's going on there?
Sure. So in the spirit of waiting for enemies to come to you and get into your range to hit them, which is a huge mechanic in the game, you spend, since all of the enemies spawn in a pattern, the game largely has a set number of points that are possibly achievable on your way to stage 6. Stage 6 is one of the first and only places in the game with randomly spawning enemies that will endlessly spawn until the actual timer runs out. So you use that to continue padding for points. And the reason that's not considered an exploit for this particular game is because there are a limited number of lives, which I discovered by pushing the score to 450,000 points. Because that's the last point at which you actually get an extra life. So it's 11 lives total, I believe you have. And then going through stage 7, you get a 100,000 point bonus from the boss. There's also a method to farm that particular boss for points, but that's considered an exploit because you're not supposed to be able to get that bonus multiple times.
So,
you can agree or disagree, those are just the current rules.
So the finite number of lives, basically you're farming for points on stage 6 and then dying and then doing it again?
Yep.
So that's not like super riveting to watch, I'm assuming.
No, it is boring to tears. I feel bad for anybody who really wants to watch anybody else play it. Playing it is hard enough. I mean, it's not that it's so difficult to learn in general, but pushing the points that high can get really difficult and time consuming, and you learn when to start cutting off runs and just killing yourself off to save yourself time because you know it's not worth the time to finish.
So I never actually grew up with Splatterhouse. Like, I read about it in magazines, but I didn't have a TurboGrafx, so I never got to play it. And then I think around 2000, 2001, I remember reading about it and thinking, oh, hey, I could try it on an emulator, except all the TurboGrafx emulators at the time were terrible. So I just kind of forgot about it again for years. Finally picked it up in 2010. Was terrible at it. I think I got up to stage 3 and kept dying. Said, all right, I'll just come back to this some other day. And then I met Caitlin through a mutual friend of mine, who, this was right about when you set the record for Splatterhouse, and shortly after that, and then I remembered, oh yeah, Splatterhouse is a game. I should see if I can figure that out again. So I was able to pick her brain to actually figure out how to play the game, like, effectively. After a couple of weeks, I managed to finish the game, and I had a lot of fun with it, and thought, well, what the hey, I'll see if I can go for the TurboGrafx record. It's not too bad. And a lot of the same strategies do carry over. It's a pretty good port. Like, the only major difference is some of the stages are a little easier. You get the hitboxes are a little more generous for Rick. Like, you can hit enemies further away, and you don't get hit as easily. You get 2 hearts back when you finish a stage instead of 1 heart for your life meter. And I think most weirdly is there's no timer on the stages. Like, you can just sort of hang back and nothing will force you to move forward or kill you. As far as I can tell, there's only one boss, and that's the stage 6 boss, where you can't just hang out forever without the timer happening. But yeah, it's an interesting port. I mean, they did cut the religious imagery like Yap mentioned. Yeah, it's solid. Like, there's a few crosses.
Got cut.
They took out an upside down cross at the stage 4 boss and the religious altar in the church. I mean, you can pick up this version on the Wii Virtual Console still, I think.
You can pick it up in Virtual Console, or you can get it on the 2010 copy of Splatterhouse, because it does have the arcade port on it.
You probably want to get it on Virtual Console, though, because then you don't have to buy the 2010 game.
But you can get it so cheap, and it has all 4 games on it.
That's true.
It's like $15, $17, and it has Splatterhouse, Splatterhouse 2, Splatterhouse 3, and 2010.
So the TurboGrafx port was not the only home version of Splatterhouse. It also came to FM Towns Marty. Are you guys in contact with the world record holder for the FM Towns Marty version?
He has to be in prison, right?
If he ever wants to see his little dog again, he'll do what I say.
So I'm taking that's a no. Caitlin, you mentioned that Anthony Paro, I think you said his name was?
Yeah, Anthony Paparo.
Paparo. Okay, he's sort of the other guy who has the record, and you're competing with him and collaborating with him.
Yep.
Is Splatterhouse like a hotly contested game in terms of the record chase?
It was hotly contested between myself and Anthony, but not really otherwise. But that doesn't, there was another man at the arcade who was picking it up, and he got to around 650 and quit, because he didn't think he could push it further. But there's definitely room for improvement. I've thought out approximate caps of scores. Like, realistically speaking, I don't think you get it for too much further past 850,000, but maybe a miracle, who knows?
Are you disappointed that no documentarian ever followed you and Anthony to create like the King of Kong for Splatterhouse, the King of Manor?
No, I'm not at all, because I've dealt with documentarians and I don't like them one bit. They were some shady people.
I do want to see what kind of barbecue sauce the Billy Mitchell of Splatterhouse makes.
Well, he makes well, I tell you, Billy Mitchell makes pretty good hot sauce. I have some from him that he gifted me, because I beat Billy Mitchell at Pac-Man. It was Pac-Man Battle Royale. It's not that cool, but it was pretty cool.
So, before we move on to the rest of the Splatterhouse series, is there anything more to say about the original game? Like, what specifically would you say is your favorite element of the game, both as a high score competitor and just someone who plays the game for fun?
I love the music for that game. It's a really good soundtrack.
Yeah, it's really atmospheric. I was going to say the atmosphere to the game is just really, it's really oppressive and.
There was nothing quite like it in
Really?
1988. It was just fascinating. Because even with Chiller, which is, as we mentioned, the game Exidy made before it, the graphics are so rudimentary, to put it nicely, that the gore element is there, but it just looks so, it's like a child's.
It's like
Crayon
Torquemada.
drawings
It's like Torquemada playing around in MS Paint. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not attractive.
I mean, think, Texas Chainsaw Massacre on Atari 2600. We're not talking super gory. So the first time you see this, it was like, are they allowed to do this with video games? Can they do that? Is that cool? Which is why you could only really find it in bars and, establishments that didn't let kids play games, because that wouldn't be suitable for a kid, no sir.
Yeah, the home version even has a little warning on it, not suitable for younger children, which is
Prior to any sort of rating system existing, no ESRB.
which is funny since the home version's it's still kind of gory, but they've toned it down a lot compared to the arcade.
But graphic restrictions more than just toning it down for the sake of toning it down.
So any final, I guess we have done our final thoughts on Splatterhouse, in which case that means it's time to move on to my favorite Splatterhouse game, which is also probably the least real Splatterhouse game. Maybe the LCD handheld game would be a little like the Tiger Electronics version, but there's a Japanese version, or a Japanese game that came out for the Famicom family computer called Wanpaku Graffiti Splatterhouse, which means naughty graffiti.
And you don't actually spend that much time inside of the Splatterhouse.
No, you are inside.
A few times, but you're also in Japan at some point, and
I would say, relative to the other games in the series, this is actually the least naughty Splatterhouse, despite the title.
It's silly.
Yeah, so Splatterhouse came out in 1988, and nothing really happened with the series aside from some ports until 1992, and all of a sudden there were two games. There was Wanpaku Graffiti, and then there was Splatterhouse 2 for Genesis. But before we get on to Splatterhouse 2, which is kind of more of the same, it's worth talking about this weird game because I picked up a copy of it recently and discovered it on a video stream, and it was not what I was expecting. I was thinking more like a horror game, but it's more like a parody of horror movies. It's really fast-paced, unlike Splatterhouse. It's not so much about memorization and precision. It's very goofy. The first boss you fight, you don't actually fight him. He's a vampire who pops out of the grave, and then there's 4 zombies who pop up. And this disco light comes on, and they start dancing, and they do a Thriller routine. And then the zombies come down while the vampire keeps doing the Thriller routine, and you have to fight the zombies. And then once you beat all the zombies, you don't fight the vampire. He just descends back into his grave and gives you like a victory sign.
There's a similar boss where you basically just watch a geisha dance, and you hit the buttons to like cheer, and then I guess you're so rude she gives you one of the crystals you're looking for.
That's not quite correct.
I didn't find
you
that
can
secret.
cheer by clapping, but the other button allows you to fart. And if you continue to fart, that's when she'll call you very rude, but she'll still give you the crystal ball.
So farting is the pro tip here.
Yeah, so it's a very cutesy, cartoony kind of game. And like I said, it's very fast-paced. Rick always has an axe instead of having to punch things with his fist. You can pick up a shotgun, which has a great piercing effect. It's like super powerful and awesome, and it's very exciting to use because it's so powerful. But yeah, it's pretty much kind of like a more traditional home-style game. And then it's really the bosses that are sort of the highlights, because each of them is a different horror movie parody. You get to a place, like you've been fighting these things that kind of look like spiders, but then you're like, maybe those are supposed to be, the little head crab guys from Aliens. And then you finally get to this table where there's a schoolgirl laying on the table, and her belly or chest starts to kind of like pulsate, and then the boss of that section is just an endless stream of those head crabs coming out. And once you finally defeated them all, she sits up, yawns, and wakes up, and like she's just been taking a nice nap. And I guess you kind of have to see it. It doesn't really explain so well.
I was watching a Let's Play of it today, and strangely enough, the fly boss looks like a California raisin, which is even more terrifying to me.
It's clearly Jeff Goldblum, but Jeff Goldblum as a California raisin.
That is somebody's fetish, so don't laugh.
By the way, the pro tip there is to go into the transformation pod. Once you go into the transformation pod, that's how you get to the geisha with the crystal.
Yeah, and you have like you have the giant green rat that you just have to get through like an obstacle course to hit once, and then he just sort of splits open and a little mouse runs away. Wasn't there like a wizard boss? It's a cute game.
In the early emulation days, I remember this game in Zero Wing being singled out for having really good bad English, and the line that will stick with me for life is "Be garbage of cesspool." So I guess that is the game taunting you or saying that you are garbage of cesspool, but who knows? But I love it.
I mean, to be fair, Rick is pretty garbage of cesspool.
He really is.
Yeah, I haven't actually been able to finish this game because I've only played it the once, but I got much further in that game than any other Splatterhouse game I played, so there's something to be said for that. And I think at the end you find out it's just like a play. It's not actually...
They're actually filming a movie,
okay.
So you're on the set of a movie.
There you go.
And by getting the crystals, you get a different ending for the movie.
But it's actually, in a sense, the most sophisticated Splatterhouse game to that point, more so than 1 or 2, because it has an upgrade system built into it, kind of like Bionic Commando. As you beat enemies, you gain extra life, so you can take more damage, which is, kind of like a... You can definitely tell that it was a game designed for home play, and it was also designed for younger players. It's not gory at all. It's maybe a little gory. Just a little gory.
Cartoon gory. It's not gory.
Yeah, there's a lot of poop jokes thrown in there too. So you get a little blood, a little poop. It's a healthy mix.
That's pretty standard kids media fare in Japan.
Oh yeah.
It's like a parodious game or something along those lines. I remember finding this one when I first started with emulation. And I was just sort of fascinated at how bizarre this game is. I would call it secretly the best Splatterhouse game. It's also probably the least, I guess it's not the least accessible, but you have to go through emulation or find a Famicom card to play it.
Yeah, but I definitely recommend this one just for people to try out because it is, like Kevin said, the least accessible and the least known Splatterhouse game, and it's a very different experience. So if the guts and gore don't really do much for you, try out Wanpaku Graffiti, and it's a different experience that still kind of has that Splatterhouse vibe. On the other hand, Splatterhouse 2 for Genesis was much more of a traditional Splatterhouse game, which is to say it feels very much like the continuation of the first game. And the sort of origin of this game is a little weird because there were a couple of Namco series that started in the arcade and then for whatever reason just continued on Genesis. This was one of them and Rolling Thunder was one of them. And I don't know exactly why this happened, but it is this kind of odd little quirk of fate that, these Namco sequels appeared on Sega Genesis. But I would say that Splatterhouse 2 is much more authentic, much more in keeping with the design and aesthetics and overall feel of the first Splatterhouse than Rolling Thunder 2 was. I know you guys don't play this one for world records, but do you have much to say about this one?
You might have more to say about it than I do. I don't have a whole lot to say because I didn't really have a Genesis growing up. So I came into this one pretty late. I still like 2 and 3, which were both the Mega Drive sequels, but I'm just not quite as knowledgeable about them as the rest. They're still good games though, and the second one is certainly the most faithful to the original in presentation and style and method.
I found Splatterhouse 2, I think it might be my least favorite of the old ones, just because it does the exact same thing as the arcade version, except it seems much more memorization heavy. It's a lot harder to make any progress in it. They do some cool things, like you have some really creative bosses, like the one where the Murder Shed, where little creepy babies come down from the ceiling and vomit on you, and you have to take a chainsaw to them. But yeah, it just doesn't work for me
fully
very
endorse
well.
taking chainsaws to mutated infants.
But it is
But
also on the
only
Wii.
evil
Yeah, it really feels like they were kind of trying to push the limits of what you could do on a console with this one. Not in terms of technical limitations, but in terms of taste. The Murder Shed is definitely sort of the pinnacle of that. Like, it starts out with a pair of gardening shears and a chainsaw flying around at you, and you have to punch them out of the air because apparently you can punch chainsaws in this game. And then once you punch the chainsaw out of the air, then you use it to cut the fetuses that descend on their umbilical cords from the ceiling until a face appears and you have to like punch it to death. It's terrible, it's horrible, but it's also kind of like a little cool in the audacity of it. Like, I can't believe that they did this. And surprisingly, this game didn't show up in the congressional hearings about video game
They
violence.
were paying. Joe Lieberman was really asleep at the switch for this. I did want to mention though, they did change the mask in both versions. In the Japanese version, it looks like sort of like Phanto, but all white. And in the American version, it's like this grinning skull. So they were trying to step away from Friday the 13th, even with this sequel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
marginally.
He was still dressed in the Jason scrubs, though.
They filed off the serial numbers with a little more enthusiasm this time. But yeah, I've played some of this recently, and it doesn't really do that much for me because, like Kevin said, it is extremely memorization based. And I got to the part, I guess it's like level 4, where you're trying to escape across a dock while this giant squid comes behind you and destroying the dock. And there's enemies coming at you from the other direction, and you have to take them out with like a perfect rhythm by doing jump kicks and things. And if you screw up even once, then you'll kind of fall behind, and the squid will kill you, and it's an instant death, which I basically burned through like 2 continues trying to get past that and couldn't. So maybe I just don't know the magic technique, but it was extremely difficult and unforgiving, which, I don't know, I guess some people enjoy that, but this doesn't really do much for me. Okay, Kaylin's giving the thumbs up, so clearly it's her kind of game. Splatterhouse 3, I think, is more my speed, because it does feel like a real Splatterhouse game, but one designed more with the console market in mind. And this one came out just a year after Splatterhouse 2. It was like 4 years between 1 and 2, and then 1 year between 2 and 3. So it seems like they kind of, I don't know, Splatterhouse 2 was really a throwback in 1992, doing that sort of belt scroller, very limited 2D design. Whereas Splatterhouse 3 is much more in the sort of mode of popular beat-em-ups at that point, the sort of three-quarters perspective, final fight, Streets of Rage, move around. It had exploration and multiple endings and all kinds of extra goodies. So maybe someone else can talk now.
I actually really enjoyed Splatterhouse 3. If not for Wanpaku Graffiti, I think it might actually be the best one. So like Jeremy said, there is a time limit on each stage, and if you don't finish the stage within that time limit, you get one step along to a bad ending, because there's, 4 endings, I think, depending on whether or not Rick's wife and son live or die. They changed up the terror mask again to make it look even more gross. I don't know.
Please shut up.
I don't know what's up with that music.
Please stop. Why?
Thank you. So as I was saying, they changed the appearance of the mask again. I think Rick is still kind of wearing the scrubs to a degree, but
No, it's more like, well, I guess you can still call it the scrub pants, but at that point it's just like he's walking around in jeans.
I was going to say, after 5 years, I'm sure those scrubs smell pretty bad.
and you know
I don't
we never
think 3
watched
is that great. I like 2 more.
But
I'm the outlier here, so clearly you may not agree with me. I never said I had great taste.
But it's got that sort of 3D brawler perspective like Streets of Rage, and you're going through floor by floor of Rick's mansion this time. And you have to clear through a room, and then you have a few different doors open up. You have to pick which one to go through, and you have to sort of find the right path to the boss to beat it in enough time to get the good ending. And there's like bonus stages if you beat the game quick enough. At the very end, you fight the terror mask if you get the good ending, and destroy it for good. And you have a power-up mode too, where you find items, and when you pick them up, you fill up this meter, and once it's got any meter to it, you can push a button where it gets into like a mutant form and can hit enemies harder, you can choke them out, you can do some weird like body horror, stretchy limbs out of his torso.
Yeah, the changes that they made for Splatterhouse 3 remind me a lot of Double Dragon 3, where they took sort of, a simple beat 'em up and then tried to add this sort of not quite RPG-ish, but adventure-ish element to it. You can travel through the mansion. You're not just walking from left to right, but you're moving and kind of like following a map and trying to figure out where to go. I know if you lose your weapons, then you can go to a specific room on each floor and find the weapons again. So there's persistence, and you have to kind of balance, like, is it worth hunting down the weapons versus finishing the level within the the set amount of time and getting the proper ending. I don't know. It all seems pretty interesting to me, and it's I think it plays really well. But I guess my question is, you two are, I would say, Splatterhouse traditionalists. So do you think that this game violates the spirit of Splatterhouse, or do you think it's, a valid take on the concept?
I think it's a valid take on the concept. I personally just don't quite enjoy it as much, but that doesn't make it bad, nor do I actually think it's bad. I just wasn't so into the changes, but I applaud them for deciding to innovate and try to change up the formula instead of repeating the same thing ad infinitum, which can definitely happen these days.
I really enjoyed it. I really liked the first Splatterhouse. I didn't like 2 so much because it was very slavish to the first game's sort of style and rhythm. But 3, it doesn't succeed in everything it sets out to, but I really appreciate what it's trying to do, and I think it does a lot of it really well. And it still keeps the weird goriness. It's got some kind of messed up digitized cutscenes, like a boar worm eating Jennifer's brain, which is pretty gross. But yeah, I think it's a solid game. This might be, next to Wanpaku Graffiti, the most inaccessible, because I don't think they brought it to Virtual Console or anything. I think you're stuck with the Genesis or the Splatterhouse 2010 version.
So this would be the last Splatterhouse game for 17 years. Do you think that was by design? Do you think Splatterhouse 3 feels like it was meant to be the natural ending of the series, or do you think it was just no one cared about it and they said, oh, well, the series is dead?
Yeah, I think, based on how they were ending it, at the end of the game where you fight the mask and destroy it, I think they were looking at making this the last game in the series, and they just wanted to go out with everything they had at that point.
I also think horror as a whole was changing. Even in '88, this game was sort of a throwback. There had been 8 or 7 Friday the 13th movies, and by the mid-90s, horror is becoming self-aware and less just like straight-up gore and body horror, and it would eventually become
More towards the Scream.
Yeah, like Scream and New Nightmare, things like that. And then we would go into torture porn, but that would be a decade off. But yeah, I feel like
that's Splatterhouse 2010.
Yes, that's actually just torture, but Caitlin would disagree, I think.
So yeah, why don't we talk about Splatterhouse 2010? Because I think Caitlin is the outlier here as well.
I am.
She likes the game.
I don't. Well, I don't love the game, but I like the game.
All right,
it's not a great game, but it's a good game.
So tell us what Splatterhouse 2010 is exactly.
It was a reboot for the 21st century or whatever of the Splatterhouse franchise, taking into account modern expectations of what gore levels would be commensurate with. Like, when they released Splatterhouse 88, that was extreme at that time, so they were trying to push the envelope similarly, and in some ways succeeded, in other ways failed, but they were attempting to push similar buttons with the envelope as they did before by adapting it for a current market.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a sense of, like, this is a very angry kind of game. You've got Mastodon on the soundtrack, so there, that's kind of everything you need to know.
They might have skewed a little too heavily towards prepubescent male teenagers, and I mean, it's not that they're a market to be ignored, but they added a system where you can collect pieces of pictures to get terrible 3D render pinups of Jennifer while you're trying to save her, and They're just
That's very much in keeping with
It's
sort
like
of
Leisure Suit Larry kind of lame.
It's kind of keeping in with games of the '80s. Rolling Thunder had Leela being disrobed as you get closer to saving her. There was also, of course, Menace Beach, that timeless classic by Color Dreams.
Color Dreams classic.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like a lot of Splatterhouse 2010's problems came from the fact that it basically was created in the murder shed of video game development. It was originally developed by a company called Bottle Rocket, and somewhere along the way, I don't know exactly what happened, but basically Namco, or Bandai Namco at this point, came in and they were the guy with the chainsaw, and Bottle Rocket was the fetuses hanging from the ceiling, and they came in with a chainsaw and cut them up, and I think finished the game internally. So I think you can really see that this was sort of like a project that had a turbulent development life cycle and didn't feel quite complete.
Yeah, they did these really fun throwback sections where they did like this 2.5D, well, like it's still straight up 2D, but 3D renders of 2D environments where you'd have the side-scrolling platforming areas as a throwback to the original series. They kept them appropriately brief and not too difficult, so they didn't really interfere. It was just kind of, it was clearly a love letter to the fans of the series. They just missed the mark on certain points. But you can't hate everything when you can, well, rectally fist a giant monster to pull out its insides. You know, it's kind of fun. Funsies. If you're a fan of gore and horror, and probably the torture porn films, which sometimes hit or miss, but you can certainly find things to enjoy in it. And the great thing is that they still included the first 3 games entirely on the disc, which is why, whether or not you agree with my opinion on 2010 being at least worth a play, especially when you can get it for $15 to $17 usually, and you get the only really easily playable arcade port of the original besides the Wii Virtual Console. And it's not the worst value at all, even whether or not you like the game.
Do you know if the Xbox 360 version is backward compatible on Xbox One?
I believe it is. I'm not 100%.
So there is a reason to own an Xbox One.
Do you want to Google that? But it should be. And the 360 version is preferable to the PS3 one. Better frame rates overall. Take your pick, but there's my advice.
So that game had a very difficult life and didn't really review that well. I don't think it sold that well. Do you think Splatterhouse deserves another shot at life, or do you think that its time has come and gone, and hey, the 80s and 90s were great, let's just leave it there and let our memories be happy?
I think it might be at the end of its life cycle, but I wouldn't hate it if somebody did try to reboot it, but maybe without trying to really aim too hard for that teenage prepubescent boy market. Like, it's not that I mind it, it just didn't really fit in with the feeling of the series, and it felt forced. Like I said, it felt kind of like a Leisure Suit Larry collectible item and not one you find in Splatterhouse. Jennifer may have been a victim before, and but she was also a transformed monster, and you personally killed her, and now we've turned her into really ugly Uncanny Valley 3D pinups. It's not cute.
I kind of feel like the game it run its course. I mean, it's very much a product of its time, you know, the sort of 80s horror scene, and I don't even know why they bothered bringing it back in the first place, but I think it's fine where it's at, dead and buried in the murder shed.
I'm not kidding when I say this, but I think the spirit lives on in Resident Evil 7 because you are in a house of splatters and you are often garbage of cesspool. But the non-joke part of that is I see a lot of the same ideas, a lot of the same inspirations, a lot of the same gore, and now it's all in VR, so it's even more horrific. So I feel like that is really where the spirit lives on.
And to just kind of wrap this up, if they did bring back Splatterhouse, what would you want to see? I personally would like to see Wanpaku Graffiti too, but
oh yeah,
that's just me.
Yeah, I'd say you could go with a parody of the 2010 Splatterhouse. I mean, it's kind of a self-parody already, but I think that would be really funny.
I think I'd like to see it, but I'd like to see it come out of a smaller studio, and that would be almost impossible to get the IP away from Bandai Namco. And I love Bandai Namco. That's not it. It's just I'd like to see a smaller studio, maybe. I mean, think Paul Robertson with Splatterhouse. And would you
That would
say
be awesome.
no?
I would say yes.
See, that's what I'm saying. So think maybe tribute games or even Yacht Club or somebody throw in some Paul Robertson, and I think you'd have a pretty amazing throwback game, but it would take the right team.
Yeah, okay. And Bob?
Oh boy, I think, yeah, I mean, you kind of took the right out of my brain there just after you said Paul Robertson Splatterhouse. That's now, I want to see that. I think we should start a Patreon for that, or a Kickstarter. And just force him to do it against his will if he doesn't want to.
That's how video game development works.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a change in the norm.
And yeah, put him in the murder shed. It always comes back to that.
He can't leave the murder shed until he finishes the game, so.
And I think that wraps it up. So thank you everyone for coming out to see us this year.
And I think we're meeting up here later, correct?
We're going to try to meet up later. Come here around 9 p.m., see what happens.
We'll gather a posse.
We might have to kick some people off tables. If we have a big enough posse, it shouldn't be a problem. But thank you, Kevin and Caitlin, for coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks also, Bob, for coming in.
Oh, you're welcome.
There's no getting away from Bob.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that wraps it up for this year's Retronauts panel. So thanks again, and we hope to see you tonight.
Thanks, everybody.
And there you go. That's the end of this podcast episode featuring Retronaut regulars Bob Mackey and Jeremy Parish, along with Splatterhouse World Record competitors Caitlin Oliver and Kevin Bunch. And until next time, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. It helps the podcast out immensely. And take care, stay safe, and game on.